You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Enemy of My Enemy. I am Hodey John.
I'm Lou.
And I'm Brian.
And this is the show where you can hear all subjects from the left, right, and center libertarian perspective, hot and fresh off of our Kyle Rittenhouse episode, which was one of our best ever. So good that we all got, guest speaking appearances on other programs because of how awesome we were.
Right?
Yeah.
So excited.
I feel like, now hold on, you need to talk with us about this. I was just really proud of it, but instead of stroking my ego, the only way I can top that is by doing better on this episode. So we're going to be talking about critical race theory today. Once again, you probably have an opinion on this, and if you feel your opinion is immobile and you are unwilling to hear other points of view, you will not at all like this episode. You will hate it because we are going to offer a lot of different points of view on this one. Usually I give an introduction on the subject, but all I have to say is that this is a very difficult one to define because you can hit up the Wikipedia and you'll feel one way about it. You hit up law school syllabi and you'll hear other opinions about it. And it's a little bit all over the map, but it's not that there aren't some similarities. And I think that it's certainly worth the discussion, of course. So, Brian, I'm going to start with you because I kind of know where Lou stands on this one. I feel like you'll be a nice wild card. So go ahead and you start off this time. Give us your thoughts about critical race theory, uninterrupted. Take all the time you want.
You bunch of white supremacist No. This is such a generic term, and I'm going to rewind us back about 50 years to this is the same panic that we had over, wait for it, sex education. Because sex education is such a broad subject. This can go from starting off with boys and girls, you're going to feel some changes in your body, to boys and girls, there's a coupon in your pamphlet there on 50% off of a 55-gallon barrel of lube. So there's a wide gamut of what sex education can cover. And this is the same thing for critical race theory. It can cover anything from, we probably shouldn't be all like in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We should probably go in 1492, he was a murdering heck, it's a whole bunch of other things. I couldn't get to rhyme in time, so I apologize, everybody. But in reality, there are aspects that are probably good things to talk about, such as the kind of genocidal nature of the founders of this country and also others as well, the way that slavery and other things occurred after slavery that did harm a significant number of races, not just Black, but also Asian and others in this country and in other countries. This is the other thing that I kind of keep on saying is that everyone looks at as America as the great Satan, which is awesome if you're in Tehran, but here in the US, it probably doesn't play as well. So the question is, what is critical race theory? And again, it gets back to what is sex education? It is such a broad topic that it's impossible to sit there and say, here's what it is. But what it should be is something that is a conversation between educators, parents, and kids, and everyone else that's involved in that process. This is not, I can tell you where it loses immediately is with the schools who say, we know what we're talking about, but we can't tell you. They pull a Nancy Pelosi. You're just going to have to wait for the class to come out to see what's in it. That's not going to fly in a lot of places. Not because everybody's an inbred racist, but because government schools do a terrible job of communicating. I mean, we already know new math and everything else. What do you think they're going to do with new math? They're going to now do this with critical race theory. They're going to homogenize it. They're going to push it out to a number of schools, and they're going to say, this is the way you should do it. And schools are either intermittently going to go, yes, oh my God, this is wonderful. And other schools are going to go, we want to look at it, but it's the hot buzzword of the day. And honestly, all the debate reminds me of 1982 when, oh my goodness, we want to tell boys and girls that boys have a penis, girls have a vagina.
Oh, you can't say those things.
I know, my God.
It's very transphobic of you, Brian.
I know. I know, and I'm going to get hate, but I'm speechless. I'm sorry. I was quoting a movie in that sense, so I apologize. Yeah, I said, "Guys have a penis, guys have it." No, I can't do the Arnie. So, it's not a tumor. Anyhow,
Lou, why don't you go ahead and counter that with what you feel about critical race theory, what it is, and how you feel about it.
Okay, I love critical race theory. One of the biggest misconceptions I think right now, and why people think this is such a boogeyman, is critical race theory is not even really something that is being presented at the K through 12 level. It's just not. And I know that because I took the course in pre-law while I was my major was government policy, federal, state, and local level policy. And I took a critical race theory course. And this is not a 101 course you might be able to get in like your junior, senior year of high school. It's just not. It is and it's a framework for a theory that breaks down the sociology and history of our nation and how our legal system, being built from the ground up during a time where we had slaves and were racist, was just the culture. Racist wasn't even a word because that's just what you were. Black people were property. It was a totally different culture. And so what it is a framework for studying that history and how it then applied to the founding of our nation, the writing of our Constitution, which originally was never meant to include Black people, people of color, Indigenous people, anybody. It was a Eurocentric Constitution. And then later it was like, oh, well, they're kind of like 3/5 of a person. And then the 14th Amendment. Originally, the framework was very racist. I mean, we got to call it what it was, but that was the time. And that's what it was all over the world. So that's what we knew. That's what we did. And instead of, as we progressed into the future, wiping all of that and starting over with a baseline of equality and equity, we have sort of woven our legal system through these pigeonholes and ways of, this law, let's talk, desegregating schools, and it's studying the history of desegregating schools and when we passed all those laws and how that impacted schools. But then zoning laws then sort of had a reverse impact on desegregation, and schools that were predominantly white in the cities are now predominantly Black and have less resources and this, that, and the other. And so all that critical race theory is the study of that entire historical framework of where the foundation of our legal system started and how it grew and changed in society and how that has affected people in our country and still does to this day. And you see that in our legal system, you see that in our education system, you see that in all kinds of things. And the really unfortunate thing is somebody somewhere has turned this into a boogeyman. And you've got several states right now that have passed or are in the process of passing legislation to ban it from K-12 public education. Well, the reality is it was never a part of K-12 public education. Critical race theory as itself was not. Now, the subject of critical race theory and the understanding of history and our growth through our legislative system through history, it applies, but that's not exactly critical race theory. Like gravity's a theory too, but I'm still stuck on the ground. It's silly to me. that people think this is such a boogeyman, and people, it's all talking about how white people are racist and everybody's a white, you're all white supremacists. And it's trying to do is unpack and address the issues that we know. This is not about individual racism. This is about institutions and systems and systemic, a legal system built on this. Why? And we're still seeing it in everything today. So I was reading through some of the legislation, and specifically the one that actually mentions CRT in the legislation out of Idaho is completely insane. And throughout the whole, it's, well, we don't want anybody to feel othered, and everybody should, we want a community of unity and so that's why there's no CRT. Well, the problem is the educators, most K through 12 primary, secondary educators do not get through. Sorry, Reinhold.
Reinhold says an episode on CRT and you didn't ask me on. I'm a sad panda. LOL. I think Lou's going to have you covered for very pleasantly, Reinhold.
If I missed something, please comment.
Yeah, go ahead and let us know if we miss anything. But yeah.
So educators who go to college to become educators, particularly primary, secondary educators, and they don't go to school focused on law, rarely ever even touch on CRT, because this started academically as a law topic. There, of course, in all kinds of other academia, things branch out, and there are parts of it that touch on education, just like we talked about, segregation and zoning and this, that, and the other. It affects literally every aspect of our life. But educators are not taught what CRT is and how to apply that framework. And so they hear this legislation and now they're afraid to teach about certain things that happened in history because they feel that that's, othering this, or the parents would be unhappy. And the only way to get rid of a problem is to shine light on it, and to literally make a law saying we can't talk about the bad things we did in the past. How does that help us learn or grow or become better? How does that actually create a school or an education system where there is unity and equity in our, among our students? It doesn't. You can't ignore the past, and just expect everyone to go, everyone's on a level playing field right now, because they're not. And that's there's a total misunderstanding about what CRT is and isn't. Your child was never being taught CRT in K through 12, and they were never going to be. That is
they are
third and fourth. Well, okay, now it's being discussed on like a certain level, but what it is, CRT as an in-depth, is not. That's like third and fourth year collegiate, like academia, pre-law.
Nope.
It has been.
No, it has been, but it is now a graduation requirement, or going to be a graduation requirement in the state of California, that you are required to take at least one ethnic studies course for the class 24, 22, 5, 26, and that you are to take a class on or pass a critical race theory test in 2029, 2030.
That's interesting.
The test is the one part that I'm going
a problem with, because ethnic studies is not exactly critical race theory. Because
no, it isn't. But it's
framework.
Yeah, this new legislation and requires students graduating in 29 and 30 to have at least one semester in the subject.
I'd like to look at more in depth at what that entails. That said, true CRT is not what people think it is, and it is.
Well, it's like sex education, though. It's such a broad topic,
right? So it's a broad topic, but I think CRT, what it is in academia on a collegiate level, right? Pre-law, when you're studying law is one thing, and what they're touching on a level in high school is, it doesn't come close. It really doesn't. So they need another word for that. Like, it's like people arguing capitalism, cronyism, and free markets.
And I'm going to quote Reinhold here. Leftists, once again, are terrible at wrapping up what they're trying to say and deciding to pick out a phrase and slap it on and alienating 60% of the country in the process.
Yeah.
So, it's like defund the police and all this other things. So it's okay. If the funny thing is that words are important. And this is what I hear a lot of times from people on the left, and I'm the righty. So this is what I say. Words are important and words have meaning. Okay, then say what you mean what you say. If it's not critical race theory, okay, wrap it up and call it super luxury critical race theory, whatever you want to call it. But call it then something different. Don't sit there and adopt like the NEA, who sits there and adopts and says, yes, we're going to go ahead and start building coursework with our educational team to go ahead and teach this going forward. And then when Reason calls you out on it and says, hey, this is part of your framework you just adopted, don't delete the website.
Right. No, I agree. I think, there really needs to be a more strict definition that differentiates the two, like what CRT is as a theoretical framework in the legal system versus ethnic studies, and just we're already doing like sociology, history, things like that in school. We always have. And if we're honest about history, that stuff's going to be in there anyway.
If we're honest about history, that's fine. But I'm going to go the full Frank Zappa here and say that the big thing that we screwed up was starting to teach social studies as opposed to civics. When people know their rights, when people know government, don't just click off the First Amendment is freedom of speech. The Second Amendment should be repealed.
Oh my God.
When we start doing stuff, when we start teaching what civics is and the ideas of this country and where the basis and case law and all these other things, and stop getting people watching Law and Order thinking that this is how every trial goes, and it should be more court TV where you see it's a total clusterfuck. That's the stuff that we really need to be teaching in schools. But this gets back to the other thing, is that these are government schools and nobody has really any input into it other than what zip code you live in, and maybe going to a school board meeting. In fact, I just actually bumped into somebody I know that's on the school board now, and he says that it was, there's a lot to it, but there's a lot of I'm not going to say what he said, but yeah, it's fun.
Lou, I'm gonna let you finish uninterrupted.
Oh yeah, no.
I'm sorry, I'm muting.
This is your time. No, it's okay. It's okay. And see, I got to take notes, like, because when Lou says something, I'm like, I got to write it down. So just we'll tear into her in a minute.
There needs to be a better level of education to the public in general about what CRT is and isn't, and what the differences are in academia between primary, secondary, and collegiate level education on critical race theory and, ethnic studies and things like that. Overall, it's a wonderful thing. If you have someone teaching claiming to be teaching critical race theory and basically saying, the white devil and all the white people are terrible and everybody's a white supremacist, like, that's very clearly covered under the framework of critical race theory, that is not the case. We're not talking about individuals. We're talking about systems. And that, while we may not be responsible for the actions of someone 200 years ago, we are responsible for what we do in the future, and how we, who have, I'm going to say the P word, privilege, have a responsibility and a duty. I did it. And I know it drives you crazy, to undo the damage that's been done, right? You can't just turn a blind eye to it, this colorblind mentality. And I'll be honest, like, I was one of those people who was singing Erykah Badu and be like, I'm colorblind, woo, right?
But that's why Chris Gurgia, made you apply. Yeah.
When you do that, right, and that comes from a good place. I think people genuinely, they think, oh, well, I'm colorblind, I don't see. And it's meant to be a loving thing, right? It's meant to come from a good place. But the reality is, when we do that, we are not taking into account the experiences of other people. And when we don't take into account the experiences of other people, when we stop talking about the past and things that we've in our history, we don't learn better, we don't do better, and then we don't actually get a community of unity. We don't actually get equality or equity. And even in critical race theory, the deeper you get into it, I mean, it's very specific about, it's not about taking down the white man. It's about getting everybody on a level playing field, that equity, or it's not about equal outcomes. It's about equal opportunity. When you go through the framework of our legal system and see all of the places and ways that minorities have it harder, those are statistical facts. You cannot deny those things.
Not denying them. Yeah.
So since we have the upper hand at the moment, how can we make this better? And that's all that study of critical race theory is. And it shouldn't be a boogeyman. It should be a freaking kumbaya moment for everybody. There's so much to learn.
This is going to be a perfect episode because I think we got a good left, right, center split on this one here. Because I'm very mixed on this one. Because so when I'm reading up on this and I'm studying up on it, reading a lot of sources, you get, like I said in the beginning, you get a lot of different definitions, and some of them you're going to love. When I was reading through, I'll admit, I like Wikipedia because you can click on the links to then find where Wikipedia gets the information. I know there's a lot of people like, you use Wikipedia. Yeah, I used Wikipedia. But like what I'm saying isn't just a summary of the Wikipedia information. It's also all the stuff that I read too. Anyway, so while I'm reading through Wikipedia just to get the overview of it, like every other sentence, I'm like, yes. And then the next sentence, I'm like, no. And then the next sentence, I'm like, yes. And then I just keep going back and forth on this. And so I'm like, okay, so like there's a lot to love and a lot to hate for me personally. Now, of course, this is my opinion. And then here's where it becomes a libertarian issue is we're looking at a lot of different states that are wavering between mandates and bans, both of which are remarkably unlibertarian things. And so there's this there's this ship you got to sail between Scylla and Charybdis trying to tear you up on the sides by saying, like, I'm not saying we mandate this. I'm also not saying we ban this. I'm trying to sail through here to say it's there. You should maybe take it to at least learn what you want. I don't understand why there would be as much pushback at this, for say, example, something that is regularly taught in our high schools, something like evolution. Maybe you even learned about something younger, something that in your younger days, like middle school, you might have heard something about it or learned about it. I'll be honest, and I won't devolve the talk into this, but I do not believe that humans evolved in the common way that it is referred to, I guess, not just primates, but that we evolved. I don't believe in human evolution. There you go. I'll say it. I don't believe humans evolved in something else. Did I take courses about evolution? Yeah. Am I now indoctrinated and unable to think for myself because of it? No. In fact, a lot of what I learned helps me defend my own position because I took it. Because I say I took this course. And so I'm happy that I learned about it. I can see why somebody would, and I can say, here's the reasons I don't. So I don't think that there is an indoctrination element to, it's all government schools. Isn't it all indoctrination or none of it? So in this point, like, if we're going to argue about like public education in general, well, then they shouldn't teach anything down to math, right? Down to, if you just are against public education, which I understand, then there's not really a nuance to this conversation. There's no reason CRT would bug you any more than teaching algebra, because if you think the public schools suck, then you might as well just ban them all. And there's no reason why critical race theory should make you any more irritated than learning geometry, Schools do teach things poorly and in ways that they sometimes do not intend to do. I believe that so there's a disservice, which is like, look at these white kids coming home crying and talking about how they learned that white people sucked. Now, did the teacher actually get up there and say white people suck? Probably not. Although, there are instances where you will find an occasion. There's instances of anything. It's a big world, right? You're going to get a renegade teacher saying something very awful or getting recorded in class saying something awful. Does that mean every teacher is doing it? No. Did I gather when I learned about race studies in middle school that I did not feel good for being a white person? Absolutely not. Or I did not feel good. I'm sorry. I did not feel good about being a white person when I took those classes. There is a problem there, right? Because this should not be something that pushes me away. It should be something that brings me in. It should be something that says you should feel ashamed. One of the reasons I have a beef with the word privilege, although I don't reject the concept, but one of the beefs that I have with it isn't because a privilege, I believe by definition, implies that you have a special right that nobody else is allowed to have. And really, I don't find any of the rights that I have as special. Right? I should be able to say what I want without being judged. I should be able to walk out. These are things that I want for other races that don't enjoy it. I don't like it to call it a privilege because this is something I want every race to experience. The idea that I can walk into a room and not be immediately judged because of the color of my skin or have an accent without them saying, oh, you can tell he's uneducated or thinking these certain things that happens to other races, right? And so this is the reason I kind of stay away from that word. But as a concept, do I understand that that kind of thing exists? Yes. But should that make you feel guilty for being white? No. I had no control over that, right? And so when we teach this and teachers come at it from, they do tend to come at it from an area that makes you feel guilty for being white, as opposed to saying, here's where we go forward. Here's the awesome things that you can do. Here's how to build up and empower a white person, instead of saying, look at all these things you should not have that I should have. And then you leave the class just feeling like garbage by saying like, wow, I guess I've built my entire existence and my parents built their entire existence off of kind of hosing you over, right? Because not everybody has the same experience. And these are all, it's the different history. Part of the problem with like reparations, when we really get into them in indigenous studies, is you say, oh, let's give this land back to the Native Americans. And you'll look at certain areas and you'll say, well, do I give it back to this tribe or this tribe that conquered that tribe or the tribe that conquered that tribe before that? And, you know, you look at, and I do not love Christopher Columbus. But if you look into this kind of thing with Christopher Columbus and say, like, the natives had no idea what he was doing when he's committing genocide. And then I just looked up the number of tribes that have been wiped out off the face of the planet in the Americas. And I'm like, no, they knew what genocide was, right? This is just a person who's terribly good at it. And that's still bad, white people.
Efficient. Right. That's that's the big problem. He was very efficient
and awful and terrible. And like I'm saying, like, this is not excusing anybody. I hate this whole, like, this culture is better than the other, because I see a lot of equals here, like, of just saying, like, we're all people, right? I mean, isn't that the idea? We're all supposed to be people and believe in equality. I mean, you look at teachers who, when Common Core came around, and not all teachers knew how to teach it. I actually kind of like Common Core, but that's a different subject for a different time. But there were teachers that didn't know how to teach it. So we got this problem. And one of them was, you know, a special way of doing addition. So they added everything to 8, right? And they gave us this simple problem, but without realizing it, to do it in the Common Core way, you know, this long addition problem, it looked like calculus, like on a piece of paper. Like, you just fill it up till there's one thing, because the teacher didn't understand that using this base 8 number system was something that was going to take up so much space, because they didn't know what they were doing. They actually, in this case, the teacher actually had the kids teach themselves. And this was from when, you know, our kids were in school. So I saw this happen and I helped them with it, of course. But I also, when I stapled the big piece of paper to their homework when they came back, and I'm like, so you gave us a problem that took us like an hour and a half to do, because you didn't know it took an hour and a half to do, because you don't know how to do this, right? And there's a lot of parents that don't know how to do this. I didn't know how to do it. I was able to figure it out. But, like, you know, not every parent is expected to be an educator. That's why you pay for public schools, right? So I understand that public schools have a rough job of it. Teachers sometimes drop the ball on this. There's so many different experiences in public school, because a lot of people will say, like, well, I don't think that's true because it didn't happen to me, which kind of brings up the whole race story to begin with, right? Not just I went to different schools, but I had different teachers and I had different experiences. And yeah, you're going to experience different things. I certainly went through things and I didn't go through things that my friends who were not white went through. And I understand that, and I have to embrace that and realize it. So now that I've kind of brought up the negative side of critical race theory, I will admit that in general, I'm kind of all for it, because I find it hard to talk about anything in history without it. You know, when somebody puts a ban on critical race theory, and if I boil it down to like the most simple definition of some laws are racist without saying black people are illegal. Well, yeah, there's a lot of that. Hey, you got to be like, you know, Brian, you brought up the Constitution. There's a lot of constitutional stuff that doesn't say, but no women though. But then you'll look at the systems in place and it says, but women can't own these things. And then you have to own these things to be this. Okay, well, that's how you discriminate against a woman, you know, without saying this is illegal for women, you know. 3/5 clause is another good example. Oh, you get 3/5 of a vote that goes to your property owner. And so then all of a sudden they are actually incentivized to acquire more people, right? Because they get to vote for you, you know, and so there is a lot of that. And I find this actually to be not only accurate historically, but this is an extremely libertarian thing to understand, that the government will pass laws that cuts down on your rights without actually having to illegalize them. So I don't have to say no guns, by the way, because that's kind of discriminatory. I can just pass a law that makes guns safer, or make sure that you have to jump through these hoops, or pay these fees, or call these people, or file this paperwork, or do that, you know, and then all of a sudden, no guns, right? Because that's what ends up happening. They don't, you know, a lot of these bans don't end up being like you're not allowed to own a handgun. A lot of the bans end up being like you have to fill out this application and prove that you've been assaulted 7 times, and prove that you live in this area of town and that you have this kind of need, and prove that at least one family member has been murdered, and prove that, you know, you've never done a single marijuana cigarette in your entire life, and that you've never been arrested. And then by the time you get it, by the time you're finished with it, you apply, you fill it all out, that comes back and they're like, we're still reviewing it, maybe forever, because there's no deadline for it. So what's the effect? You don't get a gun. Yeah, right. The effect is you do not get a gun, right? Like, and so that's the thing with critical race theory. Were there these laws set up that said white people only? Well, sometimes no. But that doesn't mean they're not racist and founded in racism. And I find it impossible to look at American history at all without that simple observation, to say that this was, I mean, there are people who don't like talking about disparate outcomes as being racist. And indeed, sometimes they're not. And I'm going to give I guess I'll give an example that, like, saying, as far as disparate outcomes, right? Like, let's say domestic abuse, and there are different races that have different levels of domestic abuse. Okay. The thing is, domestic abuse, if you beat your spouse, you are always wrong, right? That is a simple activity that might have a disparate outcome, but that's not racist or sexist. That's just saying, I'm sorry, we don't allow bodily harm in this country, right? So that is not an example of something, even though it might have disparate outcomes on different people, especially because of their history and their relationship with violence, to say it like that, that's something like that. However, something that might have disparate outcomes is if you're, you know, the Black Panthers and you're, you know, showing off your weapons and white people don't like it all of a sudden. And then you pass like, oh, well, I want your income level to be this, knowing full well that it's like 98% white, you know, that fits into that, then yeah, I know exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to make it illegal for Black people to open carry, right? And that's wrong. So there is a place for critical race theory that I think is important to learn. Are schools going to botch it up? Duh, right? Like, I mean, and here's the thing. Everybody's going to botch it up. I mean, these government entities are composed of human beings, and human beings tend to botch things up. That being said, do I want it banned? Absolutely not. I think it's something that we should learn about. I think it's something that even if you learn like the worst version of this, and I did find one syllabus that is like, this is a radical leftist Marxist, you should absolutely, you know, this is why we need to support affirmative action, and this is why we need to make it, you know, so that white people have harder requirements in order to buy a house than Black people. Like, you read, and you're just like, right? Like, this is not a good thing. This is a bad thing, right? I understand that.
It's very clearly a biased interpretation. Like,
correct. Yes, it's an out there interpretation, and it is. And now here's the thing. I will also say that's the outlier. But guess what? If I'm right wing and I find that syllabus, what do you think I'm going to what syllabus do you think I'm going to use to define critical race theory going forward? Right. And that's the problem, is like, we try to make it all about one thing. And it's really just a mix I really am mixed on the subject. In general, I don't have a problem with, I believe the general concept, and I certainly don't have a problem with learning about it. I certainly don't even have a problem with learning kind of the out there, like, while I might have a laugh about, some of these kind of radical leftist, this is a radical leftist Marxist theory that has its, roots in Engels and Lenin and whatnot, and I have a giggle about it because, like, Lou, you're shaking your head. It's not really true. And that's what they want it to be, right? That's what the teacher wants it to be. Sure. But like, I look at that and I'm just like, okay, but even then, why not learn about it? Why not be like, hey, you know what? I'm still fine with learning about it. Sure. This was a college class. It's an elective. I'll take it. I mean, what? I think for me, it seems banging. Why not at least read a little Marx and Engels and see what they do have to say about race and whatnot?
Fascinating stuff.
It is. Anyhow, that's kind of it. And I'm sorry, I'm aware that I ended without saying anything profound, but I think I don't have a hard line on this one because I think it's hard. I think depending on who defines it, they're going to hold up something in my face and they're going to be like, doesn't this make you mad? And I'll be like, yeah. And then somebody else is going to hold something in my face and say, isn't this great though? And I'm going to be like, yeah. And so I probably agree with whatever your definition of it is, because you're using a definition that I think you want it to be. And that's human nature, right? We're all kind of biased a little bit to seeing things one way or the other. But in general, I would say I'm for it. Because I find that the lessons learned from it are very libertarian, even if the teachers who teach them are not providing a solution that I would approve of. There you go. There's my profound answer there at the end.
Yeah, and I do want to add that while I am a strong defender of CRT as a subject, and I think everybody in this country should have a basic understanding of it. Like, and that said, I am still an advocate of school choice. I am still an advocate of parents having a say in their children's education, especially if it's their tax dollars paying for it. But I'm also terrified at the extremes, like the polar extremes that our country is in right now politically, because somebody made a boogeyman out of CRT, and so legislators who don't know what CRT is,
they don't even know what Facebook is. I mean, yeah.
Right. Or how Zoom works on a camera. But yeah.
Yeah, for tubing.
Like, you have these legislators that are just pandering to their bases and fueling this panic over nothing. Like, this is the Red Scare. Like, this is bullshit.
It's bullshit. But then again, just like a stopped clock, there's, it's right every once in a while. The NEA, of course, called out that they wanted to oppose any bans of that project of the critical race theory. And also, of course, they threw in the 1619 project. Yeah. So it's, there's just so much political divide on this that we're never really going to get to the point where we can go ahead and say, you know what, it's okay. You can teach. And I thought this was great. A great phrase. This is probably a better phrase. And here I am, some dork in Indiana is coming up for it. Hey, racial honesty in education. Call it that.
No, I think that's
something different. Something other than just wrapping it around all this. Well, this is all college level stuff. Blah, blah, blah. We're not going to teach that. Oh, okay, we're going to teach it here at LAUSD. Just call it racial honesty in education. Boom. Yeah. Problem solved. I don't get this. But then again, you go, oh wait, that's too easy. That makes life way too easy, and that ends all the arguing. So.
Yeah, but and the kind of the irony of all of this is that one of the core tenets of CRT is that the legal system and laws are never built or created without politics.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like benefiting the ones who are writing the laws and those sort of things. Like, and so the irony of there being legislation to ban CRT is it's a little Orwellian if you think about it.
Well, and I just have to say, Dennis, of course, this is just like Project Veritas, right? Okay. Anyhow, I just had to get that in. So
now I believe it's called critical race theory because critical theory is a thing, right? Yeah. Like I believe they did it. It's labeled what it was because I think they were attempting for some kind of accuracy. Now, as far as scrapping it at this point because it's become something else, I can certainly see that. Critical theory, I think, is no, there's not really a debate about that. And I think that that's kind of one of the things that makes me more sympathetic to critical race theory, because critical theory is just looking at, like, socially seeing how culture and society, the things we've set up, also get reflected in our power structures.
Right. So there's also tribal theory. Yeah. It all is under the umbrella of critical theory.
Yeah.
And the more they're like, it's your 101 is critical theory, and then your like 201 level is like critical race theory, and then that sort of stuff. Like, it's all an intertwined piece of most pre-law collegiate educations when you're talking about those specific things.
Right. But let me ask this question, because this is from the NEA. I pulled this, and it's from the Reason article, which pulled the data from the NEA website before the NEA deleted it. That critiques empire, white supremacy, anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, racism, patriarchy, cis heteropatriarchy, capitalism, ableism, anthropocentrism, and other forms of power and oppression at the intersections of our society. Well, if we're going to go with power and oppression at the intersections of our society, there's a lot of other isms I'm going to throw in that list: communism, Marxism, statism, blah blah blah. It doesn't call those out.
whoever wrote that very specific breakdown, like for the NEA, like
that was voted on by the NEA, by the way. That was accepted by the NEA. So
Lou's not a big NEA fan, right? Like she said, Lou is still pro school choice and everything.
But I get it. Yeah. But it doesn't help.
Right.
Right. Like, you have to, when you're educating, you have to present all of the facts. You don't get to cherry pick.
We get to cherry pick a little bit. I mean, you could say 2 + 2 is 4, and you could say 2 + 2 is 5 with very large numbers of values of 2. But then you get into the why. Yeah,
right. Okay.
I can't prove 2 + 2 = 5 with very large number values.
That's the same conversation as in like 8th grade biology, I was taught that there's XX and XY and there's boys and girls, and that's it. Right. But when you get into doctoral level, and you start studying genetics and neurobiology and the endocrine system and all of these things that physically attribute to intersex, all this broad range of different genders, because it is not a binary. But you've got Joe Bob, the redneck, over here talk about, well, there's XY and XX, and that's all there is. And I'm like, oh, you must not have gone much further than high school. I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you.
But
have all of the information.
Right. But the intersex thing, if we're talking 30%, 20%, that type of thing, if we're talking about that, then we'd be able to say, well, you didn't, you got that education. But like that 98% comment with the 1619 project had a few factual errors, et cetera. That's kind of the same thing. The vast majority of people are learning what the vast majority of society is overall. They're not learning what the nuance. And if you're trying to teach the nuance, that's something that somebody has to want to learn. Because, I could sit here and you could sit there and talk to me about the nuance of the law. I'll be very interested. You talk to me about the nuance about tattooing. I'm probably going to start tuning out after about 3 minutes, because frankly, anyhow, whatever works for you, works for you. I'm good with it. But
lucky you, I can do both.
Yeah.
But for those who are listening via podcast and not seeing visually the show, first of all, thank you for doing that, because then you get the download. But you might not understand. There was a comment that says the 1619 project, which was 98%, 98% correct, had a few factual errors, and therefore it is bad and thrown out. And I agree. The 2% can, I think, when you mess up 2%. So let's say you have something 98%, the 2% that you made up is all biased one way. Then all of a sudden, you make the whole thing, all of a sudden all the conspiracy theorists are like, they obviously have an agenda. And of course they do. Every human being on earth has an agenda, right? I used to be like, I'm such a non-biased libertarian. Well, no, because then I wouldn't be a libertarian, right? I would have no bias towards anything. I'm very biased
against the government.
Right. Yeah. I'm very biased against the government. And these are things that I have to contend with. And it's okay as long as you're aware that they're there, that the government makes. If you're generally aware and you see a story, it's impossible unless you have like a blank slate brain, which is not possible unless you're like born or in the womb or something. Even then, like you're still kind of learning a little bit, right?
Very more like
right. You're going to see something and immediately formulate opinion. Now, if you're aware of your bias, that's what we're going for. You're aware of the bias and you say, okay, did the government actually tell a big fat lie here? Or is my extremist friend, maybe reaching a little bit for the necessity of the lie when, like maybe it was an accident, or maybe it wasn't a lie at all. And my friend is sharing some really conspiracy theory nutty stuff, and I have to check. I think probably about twice a year, I share a story that ends up getting corrected. And usually those stories make the government look bad. So in theory, you could do the same thing with me. Be like, yeah, Hodey shares 98% factual stuff. And then 2% of the time he shares something that makes the government look bad, but they didn't actually do it. That doesn't make the 98% of the stuff go away. And I am pretty good about when I realize it's not true, of saying like, hey, this ended up not being true, So for example, the Waco guy was not actually at the scene. Like there's that picture going around. Everybody thought it was him. I forget his name, but the way he was going to be like the ATF leader. And everybody's like, wasn't he the Waco guy wasn't he the Waco guy who was like standing on the rubble of like posed for a picture? That picture was not him. He was not there at the time. Did that make all my other issues with the ATF in general, first of all, and that guy go away? No, that guy actually said some stuff that was actually not true, that the Waco compound had like shot down helicopters, and that he has been unbelievably anti-gun over the course of his social media life. Those problems don't go away, but I do have to understand that it was my bias that when I saw that picture on top of everything else, I posted it. And I was like, oh my gosh, look at him posing with it. Turned out not to be true. I had to issue public retraction. And then, does that make all the rest go away though? Not really. And I think to tie this back to critical race theory, we need to be able to grasp these facts and say, I'm going to take this. I mean, as a libertarian, you just have to do this. You have to get to treat everything you read like a buffet and say, I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that. I'm going to leave that out. And I think in the case of critical race theory, I don't know any one person or one syllabus or one teacher that is going to teach this in a way that you like. I mean, it's just we are too many different people. I imagine if we started talking about how to bridge racial divides on the show, we'd experience a little bit of contention at the very least, because I just think there's different ideas with how we do fix the damages that were done. I think there's some libertarians that are all in about full-fledged racially divided reparations. There are some libertarians that are like, we'll just remove what was done and let the rest take care of itself. And let's stop even talking about disparate outcomes with the laws that we pass. And so those are very different things. We can all recognize that it happened and it was a problem, but the solution might not be what you want. So what you're going to do is we're going to have to all get together at the same buffet, take the facts, and then people are going to serve us up different solutions. And at that point, we're going to have to decide what we want and what we don't want without banning the facts. And this is my issue, especially with the bans on critical race theory, is you cannot ban something, especially when I've talked about how broadly it can be defined. I don't know how you would teach certain subjects in school without talking about critical race theory. It's just not
exactly one of the biggest problems is the fear that educators now have talking about our American history, when so much of it is surrounded, you can't, how do you talk about Jim Crow laws when CRT is banned? Or, their version of what they think CRT is supposed to be in high school, right?
Right, yeah.
How do you teach our students about Jim Crow laws and the civil rights era? And how does that work? You can't.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about the subject before we move on to the piece of my mind? I think I got it all out of my system. I feel good about it.
The only thing we're gonna take a swat at privilege, I think, for just 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, yeah, let's hit it.
Not me. To do this ever since it came out of my mouth.
Ever since I was just like, oh, here we go.
I mean, I've said my piece on privilege, so I tell you what, Brian and Lou, you have a good back and forth on this.
The big thing I have with privilege goes back, and because I'm old, I'm gonna quote this as an old Monty Python skit called Dennis Moore. And Dennis Moore was a guy who was trying to make the world right. He's basically like Robin Hood. And the first thing he was doing was stealing lupins. And there's like, they're like, okay, here's all the lupins. And then people are going, we don't want this. We want gold, silver, blah, blah, blah. So he said, okay. And then he went and stole all the gold and silver from the rich. He stole from the poor and gives to the rich, stupid bitch. That's how the song goes. But in the end, he sits there and goes, this balancing of capital is a bit tricky now, isn't it? Because you don't know what the outcomes are going to be based on the inputs. Everyone is their own algorithm. You can't sit there and you can kind of get an idea that says, all right, I have 500 people here, 500 high school seniors. And if I give them this, 70% are going to go this way and maybe do something good with it. 30% are going to go party and do whatever with it. But you also but that's when you're looking at very large outcomes. If I put 500 kids into college, 70% of them are going to complete the first year. True. But you don't know if, how many more complete the fourth year, fifth year, do something with their lives, blah, 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 because we don't know where life is going to go. And that's where I really start getting with privilege. I understand that we all kind of want to have the same starting point. And I'm good with that. I'm really good with that. I think it's a little tough to do socially because, like parents, divorced parents, things like you can go back to all the numbers that show that, hey, parents that stay married and raise the kids together have, oh, geez, Dennis, we'll talk later.
I got you, Dennis. Don't worry.
No, go ahead. Okay. But the reality is that we all have some form of privilege, whether it's parents, whether it's money, whether it's your race, whether it's being born in this country and not being born in sub-Saharan Africa and in the middle of a civil war. So the reality is that here in the United States, you can kind of balance it out and say, all right, we want to make sure everyone gets an education. That's why government schools exist. They do a terrible job. And if we give school choice, that fixes a lot of problems. But that being said, that's where we start getting into, all right, are we looking for outcomes? Or are we looking for, start points? And if we start points, I think a lot of people get on board and say, yeah, everyone should get an education. Everyone should have that. But if we start looking at endpoints, that's when it starts getting really fuzzy.
Right.
So by all means, please go ahead.
When we talk about, at least people who come from my perspective, we talk about privilege, right? Mm-hmm. It's not on an individual level. This goes back to, this is something that ties into CRT, is that it's a systemic thing. Okay. Just because, statistically speaking, am a white person, more likely to come from parents who are still together. Why? Because drug. Why? Because right. So you can track back a lot of those things through CRT, which I find really interesting. Like that entire chain of how privilege applies.
Yeah, Nixon's drug law did a lot of that, but that's a different story.
Right.
Continue.
I'm sorry. But it's true. It's true. And many laws throughout. But the privilege is not intended to be on an individual basis, because you can be white and be born poor to addicted single mom and
put into foster care,
all of these things, like on an individual level. That doesn't, privilege is just the statistical chance that you would have a better opportunity or a better start because you're white. Now, that doesn't mean that you do get that better start. It just means that statistically you're more likely to if you're white. That's it. That's it.
Okay. But the question is this. Doesn't that do two things? Number one, statistically, which we all know how statistics are. You can write them whichever way you want in a lot of cases. Not in your case, Lou. I'm not saying you're making this up. I'm just saying, number one, doesn't that statistic that say, let's say 70% of, white kids who have two parents go to college, have generally happy life. And I believe that number is very similar for Black families as well. I believe the whole thing is actually having two parents staying married and all throughout the whole thing is the bigger denominator. But rewind, go back from there. Doesn't that really kind of tell those 30% of kids that didn't get that love, that was kind of their fault then? Well, you had privilege. Because I've heard people say that all white people have privilege, and it's like, oh yeah, I can see some of that, but tell that to the kids that were adopted out of foster care, like you said, that were in abusive parents, stuff like that. You're telling me that they're more privileged than the, Asian or Indigenous or Black family where there were two loving parents that raised the kids. Okay, because I could tell you those kids probably that lived their entire lives in foster care.
That's on an individual level. When we talk,
but that's a statistic still. That's the thing, is that the idea is that if you're going to do 70%, you're going to do a big wide statistic. Big wide statistics, honestly, to me, suck. they give you a direction, but they don't tell you the problem, because you may not be asking the right question. And that's my problem with the whole, well, you're privileged because of your skin color, your parents, things like that. There are people that if you're told you're going to be behind because of X, Y, and Z, a lot of people take that as an excuse.
Well, I don't know what to tell them.
Yeah, I know. But, and the reality is that we need to start telling people that your history is not you. It can be part of your story, but it is not your story. And we're moving into a homogenized cultural phenomenon here in the U.S. Thankfully, we're starting to. I think there's still a lot of work to do, but we're starting to get to a more culturalized. But when you see people sit here and attack, oh well, we need to attack the patriarchy. Okay, I get that. We need to attack the capitalist. That's generally done more for freedom than anything else. But okay, we need to attack this and that, and all these other pieces where it's like. We're ableist and things like that, and motive driven, things like that. It's like, yeah, those are things that work. I can understand asking questions about them, but if we're going to attack them and say that that's the problem, and say that and wrap it in this is a cultural belief that that hard work works better for you. Dennis just put up a post that says we're not improving, we are regressing. I entirely disagree with you on that, Dennis, and you and I can take that up on any sort of podcast at any point. If you want to look at where we were when you and I were growing up in the 1970s and 80s and tell me life was better back then than it is now, I'm going to ask whatever drugs you're taking, because honestly, things are a lot better for this country than they were back in the 70s and 80s, especially for women, minorities, kids in general, schools, everything else.
Lou, I want you to finish this off before we head into the last segment here, the Piece of My Mind segment. So go ahead and give us your response, and then we'll make our transition there.
No, this is one of those things where, I'm taking into account the fact every individual has their own personal experience. But that doesn't make systems and institutions go away. So, when and where I have the ability to use whatever privilege I may have, I'll use it for as good as I can.
Yeah. Use it for the right things. Sorry.
Exactly.
It's a good point. I mean, when you talk about it,
for the left.
You got something like, I mean, it's kind of how democracy works, right? The majority rules all. So if you get when we talk about if we get about 51% of
the majority,
that are feeling great, then that's kind of how society gets constructed around, right? So I see what you're saying, Lou. It's a complicated subject, and I think it is. I guess I'll conclude the section by saying I feel it is worth discussing. I know there was some people saying it's not worth even debating, and of course, those people tend to come from kind of far left and far right places. Right. That it's not.
They're the cut and dry people. It's cut and
dry.
Thanks,
right.
I swear to God, if
right.
I cry one more time about Rittenhouse, I was going to lose it.
Right. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Like, I mean, the reason that we debate these things, and I think it's sad that we kind of get to a place where it gets less and less muddy. Right. You know what I mean? And I'm sorry, Tony, that my main show doesn't have any minorities for you, buddy. But I do feel that our opinions are informed and we care about the subject. And I don't feel that it is tone deaf. I feel that the subject is allowed to be discussed among whoever you have. I feel like if when you shut down conversations because a person of a certain color isn't in the room, that's kind of how you get people off of your side, because we need to be able, especially when you look at, two of these three people here on the panel are for CRT. I don't know what to tell you.
For it. Hang on here. Don't say I'm against it, please.
Well, sure. I'm sorry. Yeah. So maybe 3 out of 3. I'm sorry.
I am for, and as I said, getting back to it, stop calling it CRT. Stop calling, because that's what everyone's complaining about. Fine. Call it racial honesty and education. Call it that.
I like
that honestly covers it.
So in concept, we understand. So what you're looking at is, we've got a person who's 67 years old, who was the first minority immigrant into a public school, right? Like, this is we are not far removed. I think we love to think of racism as this very distant thing. America is a very young country. And
certainly not.
And we are not the
right. Again, some people in our lifetime, we had the what was it, Department of Agriculture or whatever, like give out some more land based on race. And so this is actually blatantly based on race. This isn't even like a CRT made it kind of favor white people. This was like straight up.
Yeah.
And so we aren't far from this, and that's why it's important for us to have these conversations. Are we far enough from it? Have we gotten there yet? Look, here's the thing, and I guess I would challenge both my left and right friends. First of all, for my left friends, don't discount the experience of a right person who's had a poor learning experience about this in school. I felt bad about being white. We still teach a lot of guilt. It's hard, and I'm not. But then again, to challenge the right on this one, shouldn't the challenge then be to refine and learn to teach this better? Maybe, as Brian said, wrap it up some other way to label it if you just think it's too far gone or something. That it's still worth talking about how we get people to have that equal opportunity. And this is something that, Peter says, think about all the progress, even for the gay community.
I facepalm that one. It's I never thought, and I keep saying, I think I've said this before, I never thought gay marriage would be legalized. I never thought, interracial marriage was, my God, back in the 70s and 80s, that was, it was showing up on TV occasionally, but we've made so much progress in my lifetime. So much. And yes, there's more to be done. But to say we haven't done any is just a giant FU to all the people that fought for it beforehand. So
right.
And yes, I'm a dumb white guy, but hey,
you have a long way to go.
Yeah, I think and so what I want to say is, just understand what your bias is. Maybe loosen up a little on your whatever your definition is of it, and think about it just what the concept is talking about. And it's okay to still have opinions. Maybe you think certain laws with disparate outcomes aren't actually racist, and it's important to keep them or something. But at least understand where people are coming from, why we talk about it, and the future that we're going for. Because I think ultimately equal opportunity is a great thing. And I don't think anybody, society as a whole, one of the things that I hate on this subject is the idea that white people benefit when certain people are shackled, because that is a very zero-sum way to think about it. My life is richer when the market has more people that are cut loose to do what they do best. Me as a white person, I feel I've suffered a great deal when I do not learn about, and it wasn't till much later in my life that I learned about Black literature, right? My life is poorer for that being suppressed. This is not something that was taken away from, it was taken away from Black people. This is not something that was given to white people. This is not something that helped me out and made my life better by ignoring all of this stuff. My life is richer because of this literature. When we talk about a healthy, thriving market, the point is that it makes all the participants have a better option. When you take away participants in this market, whether it's ideas or, I mean, actual markets and economics and these businesses. When these businesses don't thrive because people are discriminatory towards them, that punishes all the participants in that market, you know? So yeah, I mean, oh boy, that's going to be a ban.
Oh no, yeah, nuke that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
dude.
all right, yeah, we ain't
Sorry,
doing
bud.
the race. We ain't doing the race thing, the racist stuff. All
Hey,
right,
hang on,
everybody.
hang on. Can I make a comment about it?
Yeah, go ahead, Brent.
It's hilarious how that comment comes in, and the comment was basically Black literature, graffiti, etc. I will tell you, some of the art that comes out of that graffiti is incredible. And frankly, if you are, offended by that message, offended by graffiti and stuff like that, I highly suggest you take your head out of
Lou, the
ass.
tattoo artist, needs to
God.
say something.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a tattoo artist, our industry and art and the technology that we use goes back to like the Chicano movement in LA and the tattoos coming out of prison. Oh my God. Like the art history behind that and the culture is so rich. And if you've ever seen the black and gray back pieces on some of these men that are these incredible portraits of women done with a single needle, like the artistry and the skill and the just mastery of this is insane. And it changed the industry in so many innovative ways. It drives me nuts when people discount the art of cultures that aren't theirs. Oh, sorry. That Terrible. Is such a passion project for me.
Yeah.
And Lou, I applaud it. I'm just going to give you a canvas as opposed to my body to do it. Okay.
That's okay. I get it. Tattoos aren't for everybody. I respect that.
It's half fear and half fear of commitment, I guess. It's all fear, I guess. It's fear of pain and fear of commitment.
I have friends who are covered, and it's fine. That's your choice. I just never thought that there's a name that I'm going to forget that I need to put on my body. So.
I love the art. I mean, there's a good reason for a lot of it. Anyhow, totally different subject. I am very late in getting to the next segment. Everybody hang tight, and we're going to hop over to the piece of my mind in just a moment. Thank you. And welcome back, everybody, from the break. I appreciate you hanging tight. These ads pay the bills around here. And, man, my bills are getting excessive because my demands are getting huge after the show is taken off. I've loved it. All of a sudden, I'm getting, I'm thinking about getting a new swivel chair for the show. I'm thinking of upgrading my Instant Pot back there that's in the background of all these episodes. That's a homemade sourdough loaf sitting there, too.
I need a new ball.
Yeah. Brian needs a new ball. I mean, Lou already got a new house during the course of this show, so I guess.
Wow.
So I mean, we're obviously we're making big bucks, and that's important. But yeah, seriously, thank you for tuning in. The numbers are exquisite. I had no idea Rittenhouse was going to be as big as it was, but it's big, and we grow every week somehow. I'm sure this is going to be a banger too, just because it's got the highly sensitive critical race theory, and people love to have hot topics on this one. For my piece of my mind, there's so much, man, there's a lot of little bits in the news. Now we are going to have a whole show about Ahmaud Arbery eventually. Because that one is kind of taking a backseat at the media, and I think there's some very important revelations for it. I think, and actually with the media kind of not covering it as much as Rittenhouse, I think also says a lot about the media, both right. This isn't even a right wing, left wing media thing. I think people aren't going to fight about it because of the way the court has gone, way the trial has gone, and I think some of those revelations are important. Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, I just have to say, as the righty guy that's on this, if you think I'm going to defend those three yokels for what they did, okay, we're just going to stop that now.
No. And you know what? Fair is fair. When you first see the video and you're not sure what went down, I understand if you were on the fence on it. I wasn't ready to say anything for the first little bit. And then after this court case went down, you're like, oh boy, there's not really a right-wing standing point on this one. And Brian, I appreciate you kind of recognizing that, because I don't think there's an argument, and so people just kind of aren't talking about it, which is sad because there's some very important stuff. Anyhow, that's more of a teaser for perhaps next week's episode, because of the revelations there. But for this week, piece of my mind, I'm going to talk about Taylor Swift's new album got released. I am a big Tay-Tay fan. I'm sure that surprises.
Fizzle fan?
I'm sure that surprises absolutely no one at all. So I have been a fan of hers since like first CDs. I love I've always felt that country music can be the best when they adhere to like a nice rhythm, when you get some drums involved. And so like right off the bat, I was like, this is what I'm talking about, right? Like, give me some, like, maintain the beat. Don't give me this. Every country song feels it needs this like abstract, like slam poetry, weird part in between the choruses. And I'm just like, this sucks. And Taylor Swift came in there, added a little pop and rock to a badly needed genre. I've loved it since the beginning. She's kind of, a lot of it, and I actually didn't mind folklore so much. I thought Red was kind of the height of everything. But I mean, this is a whole inside baseball on Taylor Swift. I won't get everybody involved in that. But I am really happy. She's reclaiming. Here's the thing: she had to re-release Red to be able to sing Red songs, because the studio owns the album, and the studio was now she got a rights to do her own music, but then she had to go and produce the CD on her own. So you kind of like roll your eyes because you're like, what's the point of this? It's the same CD all over again. Well, we actually got a little bit more than that. And she actually released like the equivalent of another album's worth of songs also tacked on to Red for her to do. So it's actually like a 2-in-1. If you like Taylor Swift at all, this new Red thing, like you're going to get the original Red, which was a banger. And then you were all those songs. And then you were also going to get about, I guess I don't want to overhype it, but I think there's like 10 to 13 more songs that you get that are newbies, and they're fantastic. But the reason that I wanted to come about it is some of those songs really touch on some really personal things. There's one song about losing a child when they're 4 years old. Obviously, Taylor Swift, what's she famous for? Songs about heartbreak, right? There's a lot of heartbreak in there. There's a lot of doing the heartbreak on there. There's a lot of making bad decisions. There's a lot of the person you're dating makes bad decisions. And you get kind of a mixed bag of all that, which is signature of Taylor Swift, of course.
And most country, really.
And most, right.
Yeah,
I screwed up. They screwed up.
Taking it to that next level, before it used to be, my wife left me and took the dog. Now Taylor Swift is, he left me, so I ripped out his soul, fed it to the cat, took his dog.
I love it. I'm all for it, because I think the thing is, when you've had these experiences happen to you, they touch you very personally. And I think a lot of Taylor Swift songs, especially when I was going through my divorce, hit home. When you're the leavee and you think you've got your whole world set up, and it just gets, and for nothing more than it was time to move on. And you know what? My ex-wife, credit to her, it probably was. Not because I sucked, just because we were very different people, and with different values and going different places in life. And I wasn't willing to let go of a contract that I signed, because that was just my mentality, is you stick it out no matter what, and however bad it hurts, because that's what marriage is, darn it. And looking back on it, things worked out a lot better for me, and I'm sure they worked out better for her. And so thank goodness she was resilient enough to not give in to my nagging of having her stay. But like when you're going through it, it is a ringer. I've said this before, but I don't feel that it is an exaggeration to call yourself a survivor when you are getting divorced from. That is a tough experience, to say this person knows more about me than anyone else in the world, and they're leaving me, is not exactly something that you recover from nicely. And there's just some of these songs, like I said, like losing a kid when they're young, or being poor, or being rich but having these monstrous expectations crushing you. I mean, they're just, everybody's going through something, is really what I get with a lot of the Taylor Swift songs that I heard on there. And it just really made me take a step back, because I'd had, of course, I think between Arbery and Rittenhouse and a lot of sensitive subjects, I've been having more Facebook fights and more social media Twitter fights. And I generally tend to, if they get really bad, I'll just block them. But I generally tend to engage and understand that, like, the arguments, and a lot of the arguments devolve into a fight. I don't believe that every disagreement is a fight. Sometimes it is, and I found myself having to block people that became toxic on this subject that I had agreed with like 95% of the time beforehand, but they just did not want to hear anything but their side on Rittenhouse, and being in the middle on Rittenhouse was unacceptable. They were unable to hear it. I would say something and they wouldn't even be able to read what I said, because they just be like, say, you love this man with all your heart, and I can't stand you anymore. Or you just think he was guilty before the trial even started. And I'm like, boy, I seem to be, I typed in there something about self-defense. You should probably give it a reread. But people are just on a hair trigger about this kind of thing. But I just think there's a time to step back when you're fighting from somebody, because it's not really about the fight in this case. It's about something going on behind the scenes, because rational people don't act like this. And and I understand it. Like, I've been in an irrational place myself. I didn't lash out with anger because I think that wasn't my way, but it's not like my way. It's not like what I did was any more helpful. I internalized, I withdrew, I hermited myself. I hid all the problems that were going on. And anybody who would have said anything hurtful to me probably would have hurt twice as much, 3 times as much, 4 times as much, because of just the day you're going through. And I think that we need to kind of realize this, that when we're talking with people online, we are debating ideas, but we're debating ideas with people, and people are going through stuff. And maybe you think like, oh, how bad can their life be? They're rich. They've got a hot spouse. They've got it all going. They're white and I mean, I'm a WASP, for goodness sake, right? I understand having a lot of advantages in life here, being a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I get it, like there's some nice things that happen because of that. There's also some really terrible things that have happened that I was in a rough place for. And anybody who would have said like, you're fine, you just need to get over it, or, talk to me poorly just because my opinion was one thing, would have hurt all the much more and driven me away that much more from what was being said. It's kind of a generic, like kind of ABCs, be nice to your friends argument, but I think it's one that we need to think about as adults. People are going through breakups, miscarriages, difficulties getting pregnant, depression, anxiety. I have a friend who's crippled by anxiety. And you just realize that all these problems come up, and we're all going through this together. And I want to strongly encourage, and I'm going to say this out loud because I need to challenge myself to it as well. But as soon as it becomes a fight instead of an argument, walk away. You don't need the last word. It's not important. It is not nearly as important as that person getting the healing that they need. If you want to salvage, if the friendship is important enough for you to salvage, maybe ask and make sure everything's going all right, not snarkily, because people do that in the middle of the fight and it comes off not nice when you're saying, is everything okay? Because you have a certain opinion on something. But when it devolves into a fight, really just leave, just walk away. It's not worth it. It hasn't been worth it for me. I am in a great place in life. And I will say even these fights that I've had have not made me feel good, like made me feel worse. I don't think any of them have kind of made me feel worse as a person, but made me question myself and my messaging and the way, you go back and you read something and you say, well, I know they didn't read this, but should I have made this more prominent? Maybe, you get paranoid. And I'm not good paranoid. I get all stringy. I get weird. I get wired. I'm already weird and wired enough. I do not need to have the added, franticness of stressing about the way I type something or anything like that. So that's all I got to say is think about it. I mean, everybody in your life has probably lost a loved one. Everybody's probably lost a pet. Everybody's probably been through depression before. There's a monstrous amount of people who have considered taking their own life, and it's not a majority, but certainly a bulk, a good chunk of people that have made plans to take their own life. If you knew all these things about them, would you still talk to them that way? I would hope not. If the way that you've been talking about is negative. I get it. We're talking about ideas, and these ideas are important. I, of all people, know that. I wouldn't host a show that literally is just talking about ideas from different perspectives if I didn't find that ideas were important. But ultimately, you're talking about them with people. And I get it. Like when you talk about immigration and you have someone that you know and love that has been hurt by the immigration policies in this country, it feels intolerable that somebody would stand up there and be an ass and defend what's going on at the border. And, it feels like dismissing your friend, right? Or dismissing, if somebody was sexually molested in the care of ICE workers, you're not going to have a good things to say about them. So when somebody does, it's hard not to make that personal. I'm just saying, like, take a deep breath. If you're in a place to be the bigger person, do it. Take that deep breath. As soon as you see it get into a fight, just be like, you know what? Yeah, it's fine to just say, I love you too much. And I don't know that this is going to be constructive. So and you're a person, and I love you as a person. And I feel like maybe we can have this conversation someday. Maybe it's you, maybe it's me, maybe I'm just not in the place right now. That's fine, but let's just not have it and skip it. There you go. Another long rambly thing from me, but anything you guys want to talk about there?
I like, you know, go don't interrupt me.
I need to get better at that, Lou. I'm sorry.
I'm totally kidding. We both started talking at the same time. No, it's something that actually, I think I heard it put best from you quite a while ago, Hodey, you know, taking into consideration other people's experiences. And that is, you know, while I may not have always had the best words for it, that's something I've always tried to do. Sometimes I feel like it's gotten me in trouble, even, you know, oh, well, you're wishy-washy, or you don't, you know, and I'm like, well, I'd rather take into consideration somebody's experience rather than holding a hard line on anything. Even if I completely disagree, I can still look at a situation and say, I understand why you feel that way.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And sometimes that's what you have to do.
Yeah, for real. Brian, I know you have something to say about it.
Yeah, I feel the same, Hodey, especially about Norwegian death metal. So,
sweet.
There's actually
I get whatever music's,
which is phenomenal.
Yeah, whatever speaks to you. It doesn't matter if it's country or, you know, whatever else. That's beautiful, and let it keep speaking to you. Taylor Swift to me was okay. It's okay. And if it speaks to you, by all means. Lady Gaga actually speaks a lot to me, but I'm more astounded with her talent and what she does, especially when you see her before she was Lady Gaga. The stuff that came out of her was just incredible.
She's written some songs that became famous before she was able to perform on her own, and I think that's pretty astounding.
You see Stephanie Germanotta, just Google that, everybody, and you'll just see her play, and you go, oh, it isn't just goofy hair, meat suit type of, no, there's talent there.
Naked Meditations.
Yeah, exactly.
For whatever it's worth, as far as Norwegian death metal goes, Nightwish is my most listened to playlist on Pandora. So there you go. So we can have some overlap, even if we don't. We won't listen. I won't subject you when we go on a road trip together. I'll keep my Taylor Swift CDs.
Hodey's even
reluctantly
to music.
Yes. Even the middle ground when it comes to music. Lou, let's have a piece of your mind.
Okay. So one of the things that I have been trying to do is identify either things in my life and my circle specifically that allow me to live, I wouldn't say off grid per se, but allow me to find alternatives to government solutions, right? And just prove to those that are like, wow, you can't do it without the government. Like, and I have recently discovered, and at first it started out as like, I was watching this as an entertainment thing. On YouTube, there's a channel for Adventures with Purpose. And these are like professional scuba divers who do like search and rescue stuff. They started out, and it's all volunteer. People donate or something. I don't know how they make their money, but they basically go out and volunteer. And they started out doing, you know, cleanup in lakes and rivers and things like that, recovering vehicles, that sort of stuff. On one of their trips, they were recovering a vehicle and come to find out, unfortunately, there was a body in the vehicle. Well, they ended up closing a cold case. And they started getting phone calls from parents and family members of other missing people, cold cases that their local police department just didn't have the resources to devote to finding them. And they've, over the course of, it's been a year or two, they have recovered, I think, 12. They've basically solved like 12 cold cases or more.
Wow.
And it's really incredible. It's all volunteer work. You know, they work with other organizations, people who have like sonar boats and stuff like that. And so they go out and they are doing things that like we think our government does for us, but they really don't. And in, you know, obviously in these cases, there are limitations they have to work within. So obviously when they find something, they have to call law enforcement. Otherwise, then they get in trouble for like whatever. But in a lot of cases, you know, if it's a small town and a lake or something, they call law enforcement to come out because they found something. Law enforcement actually ends up asking them to do the recovery because they have the equipment, they have the resources, and they don't have the bureaucracy and the red tape and this, that, and the other. They don't have a prosecutor saying, hey, it's been 6 months, let's just let this one go. Because it's an election year, you know? And so through them, I've discovered there's actually an entire like kind of underground community of people who do this. There are people who specialize in land searches, people who specialize in, you know, water searches, things like this to help bring closure to these families. And when you look at the numbers of missing people in this country, it is astounding and absolutely terrifying. And so many of them like become cold cases because police departments don't have the time and the resources to dedicate to it. And there are now so many civilian groups out here picking up the slack and filling in that gap. And I think it's amazing. And it shows and it proves that we can be a society. There is the potential and the ability where we can be a society where these sort of, you know, government agencies don't even have to exist anymore because there are people out there who do this on a volunteer basis, and they would train more people, and, you know, people donate to them. So they have the resources through people who just donate to them versus, you know, our local government taking our money, and they can't, like, half their resources are tied up in bureaucracy and never bringing these people's family members home. Right. So, yay, awesome. Found a really cool anarchist solution to a really terrible thing that a lot of people think, you know, well, we couldn't do it without the government. Couldn't do it. We absolutely can. And there are people out there doing it. And I just think that is amazing.
Agreed. It's how every recovery operation is. There are very few government groups, besides the 50,000 departments in federal departments have their own police departments, SWAT teams, coffee baristas, whatever. But on the state level, there's usually nobody. There might be a few people that are trained that can do it, but they can't do like a full like search and rescue unless, you know, honestly, they all come out if there's like a toddler or something, then people are going nuts. But your druggy friend who may have fell into the river, they aren't gonna. We looked, we drove up and down and didn't say anything. Have a nice day. But it gets back to like the murder down in Florida, or the parent suicide, where all the state and federal groups just wiped over, and they didn't go where the parents told them because they thought the parents were lying. Just one of you take a moment, go over there, take a look. Oh, there's the body, or at least there's personal effects. So,
right.
Anyhow, that's it's great, but that doesn't mean that there aren't things that the government can do. Equal access. Well, I know that gets that irks the anarchists. But I agree with you, Lou, that private enterprise generally does a better job and is more incentivized to do something in a competitive environment than any government agency ever will.
And I think too, like, and one of the things there, you see interactions between these groups with law enforcement as they call them in and things like that. And it was interesting to watch the different types of interactions they would have. There was one, sheriff who seemed real pissy that somebody basically stole his thunder on like a 7-month-old case they'd given up on. And then another officer, came out for a different case, and they were like, thank you so much, because, I tried to get boats and divers, and I was told that we don't have the resources and that they couldn't be allocated to my county because this county needed them. And, it was just paperwork and red tape, and thank you for coming to do this. So it was really interesting to see the dynamic with different law enforcement agencies and officers.
Yeah, it's funny when, and again, I don't feel this is an ideal solution either. But if you're going to deal with police, having them on a type of contract has worked out fantastically. We did some work with the main show about it, and so I won't rehash too much of it here. But when the people decide what crimes they want prosecuted, it's funny how the focus changes from people growing plants to people missing, to people's rape kits, to people's murders. I mean, it's one of those things that, and I it's sad. And I know, like, they say, well, we just don't have the resources to it. Well, no, you're not willing to dedicate the resources to it. I mean, you have a squad of 80 people currently sitting there with a speed gun ticker in their hands. And yet you're sitting on 30 different rape cases that are unprocessed, rape kits that are unprocessed. You're sitting there on 80 different murders. I mean, you look into, what's it in Chicago? It's over half of the murders aren't even getting investigated.
Yeah. There's
but bucks, right? It's where the bucks are. Brian's got it exactly right. And this is the thing.
Elon Musk and the UN talking about ending world hunger for $6 million. And he was like, sure, okay, tell me how. I got the $6 million.
If you tell me how, I'll sell my stocks right now and we'll do it.
He did the one thing that they all cringed on. We want some open source accounting showing us how you are going to spend the money and how it's going to fix it.
Yeah,
and he said, I'll do it in an instant. Yeah, and they're all like, oh, well, it's a far more difficult issue than you can just tell. And I'm like, no, I'm a big fan of your good idea should be easily explainable. I mean, like, not like grandma, but your good idea should pass, a toddler's and a grandparent's common sense. You know what we're going to do? We're
be complicated. It doesn't.
And
yeah,
Lou, I don't want to take away from your point, though, which is more so that there's alternative solutions that we can be part of the process right now. Mm-hmm. I would encourage you to look at your immediate surrounding area. And you know what? If you live in a big city, obviously you're not going to feed all the homeless there, right? But you're right. But can you be part of that process? Or maybe you take a look at like a different problem and say, like, you know what? I think there's a solution to this. So, real good example here, and again, costs nothing, not really government program, but we kind of have an underground railroad here of kids that are running away from abusive situations. And all it takes is to register as a home. And and this isn't a government registration, by the way. You sign it with the website and just be like, man, there are kids who are trying to get away from an abusive situation. And we want to, and of course they still want to meet with you, talk with you, and make sure you're not gross, like, obviously if you're like, please have teens come to my house, that's potentially a gross situation, right? But to be a part of that is something that is completely voluntary, and it's something that the state's not going to help with, because guess what? When parents call about their runaway teenager, that doesn't go the runaway teenager's way. That goes the other way. That goes the abuser's way. And so what I'm saying here is, like, there's these, and even if that's all you can do, there's so much that you can do when you say, I'm sorry, that's all I can do. That means the world to somebody. Being able to sleep indoors, or like choosing between sleeping indoors or being abused or sleeping outdoors. I mean, there's no choice there. Everybody wants a safe place to sleep. Everybody wants, I'm sorry that you might not be loaded. And maybe you don't have, all you have is a couch. You don't even have a full-fledged bed. I guarantee somebody who is running away from an abusive situation, that is going to mean the world to them to get out of a household where a fight's going down or alcohol runs rampant and somebody's in a dangerous place, you know?
Yeah.
I love watching sports is going on. And I love watching the classic sports stories. You'd be surprised how many is just my dad or my mom was abusive. My dad or mom was, and toughened me up, made me grow up immediately. And I had to choose. And like some of these days had to choose between like pointing a gun at them and like saying, you're going to leave the house now, or having the gun pointed at them and doing whatever the person said, you know, like, and so, I mean, this is a very specific example, and I don't want to take away from Lou's homicide one, because that's an awesome one too. Maybe that's all you can do is say, you know what, I have a couple hours every month to look at Google Earth and do some research, and you want me to scan a certain area, I can help you out. Like whatever you can do, it's going to feel like too little, because we think we put so much pressure on ourselves to take care of an entire life, right? To say like, am I going to fix a problem? Well, we look at what we do is we tend to look at things like an entire homeless situation or an entire runaway teen situation. Or no. You're never going to fix all this by yourself. But if you start and then you create a culture of it, and then you have that impact the people in your family, and they have it impact the people in their family, it spreads. I've told the story in this show about how we got, after the state destroyed the tents and belongings of the homeless people here, which happened because of the pandemic, and many of which, when I say homeless people, these were people who were trying to save on rent. And so they were like, I'm going to move out for a little bit, sleep in this tent, and then whatever. And when the state destroyed all that stuff, we got it back. And this was, did I do that by myself? Absolutely not. Did the Libertarians of Weber County even do it all by themselves? No, we did not. But we got enough people that volunteered to help out that it took care of an entire problem. And it starts with being willing to be the one to help out a little bit. All you're ever going to be able to is give a little bit. But that's all we need. That's all this world needs, to a little bit, to solve unsolved murders, to start fixing, the focus on rape kits, to start helping runaway teens, whatever it may be. Like, just give a little bit. And I promise you, if it's in a place of need, somebody's going to be appreciative of it. Yeah. Brian, why don't we close with a piece of your mind?
It was kind of tough this week. I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about. And I think I'm going to talk about the war machine that goes on. And I'm not just talking about the Pentagon, but the saber rattling that's going on currently in China, the kind of how they got themselves into this, and groups and businesses in our society and in a number of countries that are going to profit off this. There's been a report out that a major accounting firm has been consulting not only the DOD, the DOJ, a whole bunch of other agencies like that, but also consulting their peers over in China. Brings up a couple of conflict of interest concerns, obviously. And with the current saber rattling that's going on over Taiwan, which, don't get me wrong, has been done several times before, this one seems a little more intense than last time. It's deeply concerning that the war machine may be trying to ramp up for something big. China is in a really bad spot. 65% of their energy is produced on coal. They decided to shut off their largest coal importer, which was Australia. And they had that also nasty little problem of going ahead and enacting additional safety regulations inside coal mines in China due to popular demand and coworkers dying. So this has put them in a bad spot. In some areas, they have 7 to 9 days of reserves. The first big winter storm just went through China, and it's not going well at this point. So we may start seeing, we've been already warned that there's going to be problems with exports coming from China. But of course, this is always usually a good excuse for somebody to suddenly go, well, historically, this has always been part of it, and they have resources we want and money, so we're just going to go and invade it, a la Kuwait. Although you can get into the Kuwaitis drilling into the Iraqi fields, that's a different story. So that being said, the war machine seems to be ramping up. I hope I'm horribly wrong. And I hope that the problems in China do get resolved quickly. The people of China do not need to suffer a cold, dark winter because of the poor decisions of their elected, quote unquote, but totally unassailable government, which will do nothing to help them except enrich themselves. So we're looking at some interesting times coming up, not just from COVID, not just from this, but I'm just hoping that we are going to eventually have the common sense to back off, defend Taiwan. I think defending Taiwan is paramount in U.S. interests in the area. I don't like that idea, but I also don't like the idea of China going in and wiping out a free country and taking them out to deflect from their own internal problems.
War is it's hard to think of anything more antithetical to libertarianism. It is the crux. I mean, it is the crux. Even when they were having all those economic debates a while back of why shouldn't we centralize government? Why shouldn't we do this thing where the government gets to control it? And war was the selling point. War was the one. That was the one where the libertarians were saying, because it incentivized governments to go to war. That's why you don't do this. And they're going to end up doing it. The China situation is heartbreaking because they've got such a grasp on so much of the global economy. It's a heartbreaking thing. I think, I mean, we saw it happen in Hong Kong, and how many people that ordinarily are all about freedom suddenly are like, well, I can't speak about that really. What a messy situation. I don't know what's going on there. And now Taiwan, maybe next. It's bad. I'm not sure if I can add anything other than what Bryant said as far as like commentary, because I think he did a great job breaking it down and what we're looking at in the future. But you're going to get another chance to stand with the people of Taiwan, and you might as well be ready for it now. And just kind of say, you know what? No, I understand we're talking about countries. So all you anarchists there, we're going to be like, it's still a country, it's still a state. There's levels of evil, and China's level of evil is difficult to contend with. And a lot of the people that you're fighting, you would be surprised, especially in countries like Hong Kong and Taiwan, how open and passionate these people are about more and more liberty, and open they'd be to your message. A lot of these countries that are the most, in fact, I would say the countries that libertarianism is doing best in today are the ones that have recently gone, or at least in their history, gone through serious oppression and threatened to lose their lives. It's serious, people. You gotta take a stand and be on the right side of it. People are going to make a lot of excuses of why we should say nothing, of why we should do nothing, and that's exactly what politicians want, because they want to keep being able to manufacture these mechanisms of war, these machines of war that will either not get used, so bad, or get used, which is worse. Lou.
Yeah, everything you just said. The only thing I have to add to that really is the U.S. will somehow involve itself, and Biden will botch it gloriously. So,
yeah. And if it does happen, the only solace I can take is that I think 90% of the free world is going to stand up and say no. It's going to be like Iraq invading Kuwait. The only problem is these guys have nukes. And as I've said on previous podcasts with other people, I think the next nuclear weapon, which I'm not a fan of using, no matter how much people think I like nuking preschools because they stole my apples, is not going to be delivered. Is not going to be delivered by a ICBM, but it's going to be delivered by container ship. So. And that's what really worries me overall. So I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping that China realizes that pretty much the free world is going to be standing up against them. Japan, South Korea, everybody else. If they want to start World War III, this is a terrible way to do it. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that the people of China, who are getting smart at getting around the Great Firewall, are going to see what's happening and just basically not allow their leaders to carry this out.
Yeah. It's funny how many tyrants have tested the waters of invading another country and then been hit with the ramifications, and we're like, oh, how many times does like Putin or Russia or something just like, oh, send some tanks over we're just stationing some troops here, and then people are like, no, back you go. It's like, oh, okay, it wasn't a big deal. Just kidding.
That's going on, by the way, right now in Russia. They've repositioned in the Ukraine, and also Belarus is threatening to shut off the gas pipeline feeding Germany. So yeah, I mean, there could be a lot of things that go south very quickly. Hopefully the Germans haven't turned off their nuclear plants. I mean, they've turned them off. Hopefully they haven't dismantled them. Hopefully they can start them back up here pretty quick. But that's really the big worry, is that, yeah, we're in a tinderbox right now, especially with COVID. So anyhow, sweet dreams, everybody.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Tune in next week. We'll see what we have. I know Larry Sharp still has to be, he's still working on the reschedule. I don't know when that is, but he'll be on the show at some point. We will talk about Ahmaud Arbery. I'm hoping that we can get there before even the ruling. So maybe we'll see how that goes. Maybe push that to next week. And that's something else to look forward to. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, whatever's hot, you can find it right here on Enemy of My Enemy. We got all the best people. I'm so stoked for all of us and the entire crew here at Enemy of My Enemy, because I think the libertarian world is becoming aware that our ideas are fantastic and worth consideration. And the fact that we are able to have a discussion about it as opposed to an argument is fantastic. I love it. I love that we can have these disagreements and understand put them in their place, whether they're big or small. Understand that these are differences of opinion. And I mean, you said, Lou, that, with experience, everybody's got a valid right to their experience. And that is something that we should never discount. It's the one way you lose a debate, by discounting somebody else's experience. There's a lot that you can do to get strikes in a debate, but the only way to lose it is to discount what somebody knows to be true because they have lived it. And I understand that there's a lot of that out there, and whatever your solutions are, that we got it. And I'm just all I got is, I'm rambling here, but all I got to say is this show is definitely on the up and up. And it's not because of the show. It's because the people that we have here, that do such a good job. People can't hear but listen to this and say like, hey, do you want to come on my show and talk about it? Do you want to come and talk about it over here? And it's that list is only growing and growing, and seeing that there was a need for this. That's the whole reason the show started, was fan request. Was like, I want somebody who talks about left and right and center libertarian positions. And I'm tired of just like otherizing what the left or the right libertarians actually are. Well, here we all are. And here are our thoughts. And I appreciate you, listener, for being a part of making this grow. If you're listening to it, I'm telling you, every single number does not go down. I still remember back to the very beginning, when I think our first show probably has 8 downloads.
That's cute.
Yeah, right. It's cute now looking back on it. And I'm only this is show 29, by the way, if you're listening. Critical Race Theory 29.
Really?
Yeah. So this is only show 29. It's been about I guess it's been a little over half a year now. A little over half a year. And it's just amazing that I do not take for granted, because the way these numbers grew wasn't 8 and then 562. It was 8 and then 10 and then 13 and then so on. And so if you
relive all of that,
right? I don't. And honestly, we're hitting our stride right now. Socialization doesn't come naturally for me, as you can tell with all my. I'm very much a writer, and this is definitely out of my comfort zone, but I love doing it. I'm getting more used to it. I think we really are just the best is yet to come. And I can just tell our latest episodes are getting better as the viewership improves. That's when we're getting our best episodes, which is great. Not saying don't listen to episode 1, but it's more important that you hit the subscribe button and listen for next week's show, as opposed to going back and listening to all the other ones, even though that boosts our numbers up. But yeah, it's getting better and better. Thank you both for being part of this and sacrificing part of your evening. I freed you to be with part of your families. Listeners, I'm still looking for a sign off line, and I just don't have it. So again, kisses. Love you all. We'll catch you on the episode next week. I look forward to seeing you then. Brian's hilarious. And that's the end.